Hello, Scream Demons, and welcome to the Screams from the Basement podcast with Sam and Casey. I am one of your creepy co-hosts. I am Casey.
Sam, let's get screaming.
And creeping his way into the basement is Bram Stoker Award nominated editor of Hell Comes to Hollywood, publisher at Big Time Books, and screenwriter Eric Miller.
Eric
Thank you.
joins us to chat about his debut novel, Whatever Happened to Uncle Ed. It's the story of a former high school basketball star who does battle with demons and his band of misfit allies. Please welcome Eric Miller to the show. Eric, welcome. Congrats on the book.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. And yes, congrats on getting the damn thing out of my head and into print finally after too many delays.
It's a process. It's a
It's
process.
it's a process. People don't realize how much it is. And then also when I do have editors that help me, and my friend Steven at Genius Books does the actual typesetting and formatting and turns it into a real book. But there's so much work when you're doing it yourself, and
Yeah.
just the writing itself, and then you have to switch into editing mode and publishing mode and marketing mode and podcast mode.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, like what we say on our podcast all the time is every movie's a miracle. Every book is just as much of a miracle as well. So that's the first thing. Like, let's start with that. How do you go from this idea of whatever happened to Uncle Ed to it actually being out, published, people can pick it up right now? How does it go from concept to actual finished product?
Well, a million steps, obviously. The first and most important one is actually writing the damn thing. I had many starts and stops on this. It started off as a short story a billion years ago, and then I was encouraged, hey, this is great, lengthen it. And as my writing powers as they were grew, I made it a novella. Then I did a screenplay, but that wasn't able to capture the entire story, but it did help me zero in on the elements that mattered, the great straight storyline. That's the one good thing about being trained as a screenwriter, is you have to be economical and tell your story in a certain structure. And then when I finally went back and was converting it from that point, of course, blew up that 3-act structure. It goes back and forth, flashback madness until of various characters, present, past, and eventually they come together into a traditional 3rd act. After that, like editing like mad, like I said, 2 different editors that have helped tremendously. Like I know some of my particular writing tics that I've been getting red marks on for my entire life from English teachers, and I gleefully ignored them, thinking I was smarter than them. But miraculously, they were right. I was wrong. I admit it. So the editors did it, but then I'm an editor myself, as you mentioned. And when you kind of have to disengage yourself from your own text and then go in just clinically, I remember at one point years ago, my good friend, writer, director, Rich Tanny, had said he was working on some project somewhere, and he had spent basically 6-8 months going line by line over a screenplay. And I remember marveling, like, how could you actually do that? And when I had this text done and I had a date, I wanted it to be out, have the final things, I spent 6 weeks at least, probably 8 or 10 hours a day, literally going back over line by line of text that I had written and read and reread and rewritten for years, and marveling at myself that, like, oh wow, when taking that super hypercritical eye, making sure first novel, I want to make sure I don't come off too much like an idiot. And I'm still sure there's dangling participles and things like that in there here and there, despite myself and my wonderful editors. But I remember, like, Rich, you were right. You really can drill in and do that. And as I've said before, when I finished it and finished that final draft to send off to be turned into, which I'll get into in a second, to turn into a book, I felt like a real writer. Like, wow, I finally did this. And it was partially because I take a lot of care on my stories. I think about them a lot before I sit down and write them. So a lot of times my first and second drafts are usually pretty close to what the final product is. And yes, it's all in the rewriting, but it's because I take so much time and care in the planning sequence. But this time I went back and just went over and over. And even now I'm flipping through it and I go, oh, damn, I should have worded that sentence differently. But at that point, the text is done, supposedly done. Again, Stephen Booth at Genius Books is laughing at me if he's listening to this because I drive him insane. I send the final files off to him, and he and his wife, who is one of my editors, thank you for making me better than I am, Leah, they he physically turns this into a book. Now, these days, Amazon offers the services. There's a million companies that offer the services to turn your book, and you can just send in Word to Amazon and other people. I still prefer to go with a private person. I use Stephen and Genius Books for that because I'm just so hyper detailed when I produce a book. I want it to be right. I want the margins to be right, the font to be right. I want the text to be readable. It's just lessons I've learned over this being my fifth book, first novel, but fifth book with 4 anthologies before it. You want everything to be right. And while this is all happening, I'm working with the cover designer, cover artist, the wonderful, amazing Zelda Devon. Check her out on the old internet. Her art is amazing. She came to me through my friend Drew Pierce, who did the covers for Hell Comes to Hollywood 1 and 2. He's a storyboardist artist by himself, but he's with his brother Brett, is a writer-director of Deadheads and The Wretched. They're doing The Wretched 2 here soon, I believe. Okay. He wasn't available, wasn't his style, but he recommended Zelda, and I checked out her website and went, wow, this is amazing. And in talking to her, it turned out we were both giant Bernie Wrightson fans. So I had this rough idea of what I wanted at the cover, if you've seen, as a conglomeration of a few different scenes in the book. So Zelda kind of took my terrible idea and made it what it is now, which is amazing. Kind of comic booky, but kind of serious, kind of horror, and a little bit of mystery. So again, the process, while Stephen and other people are off working and making the interior of the book, the cover artist you're going back and forth with that on, little last touches. And if people don't know the process, covers, you have to fit extreme detail. Like you have to go by the page count to see how wide the spine is, and you pick your format. So there's a lot of details that have to be done exactly right. Things can be fudged around a little bit, and every professional artist and designer knows this, that you leave bleed room or mess up room on the edges that people don't actually see. So eventually all of that comes together, and you have the final files, and you look it over, and you send it in, and you get your proofs. Either you can do online proofs, or you get a print proof in the mail, and then you go, oh crap, I made a giant error on page 67, and then you go back in and crack the files and start everything again. Or in my case, again, driving people nuts. Oh, I worded that wrong, or I missed yet another typo. How did they sneak past? Eventually, you get the book out in its perfect form, and then it's available. And you start, and again, in the process of it, at least the way we do it, is you start with the print book, because that's the most complicated with the cover. All of the other files spin off of that. The ebook files of various types, which these days there's only one ebook type. There used to be 2 or 3. And you make a PDF for readers and all that stuff. So it's a very long, involved process, but I'll tell you, there's nothing like the thrill of picking up the book. You get it in the mail, and even if it's just the proof, all of these thoughts and ideas and all the hard work and everything is literally in a, whatever it is, 289-page thing in your hands that you can hold. And I know most people are doing it on their Kindle and stuff these days, but actually physically holding that book is one of the biggest thrills ever.
Yeah. For sure, for sure. I love that you brought up the cover art, because that is, the cover art is amazing on this. I love that it feels hand drawn. Like so many covers these days are, Photoshop jobs or, graphic design, and that's all good, but there's nothing like a hand drawn cover to really sell a book.
You're completely right. And we're as AI is allegedly taking over the world, literally and figuratively in some cases. Hello, Skynet, please be nice to me. AI is putting many people out of work. It's a technological revolution. There's been many before, but it's horrifying when it hits people that you know. And I'm a big fan of artists. I always like to say that if I can do it, it's not art, being obviously downplaying my own abilities, because writing is definitely an art form. But friends of mine, other people that can just take a blank piece of paper, a blank canvas, and pick up a brush or a pen or a pencil and make some amazing, even if it's a stick figure, for crying out loud. That to me is like, how do you do that? I have the same question when people ask me, how do you write a book or how do you write a story? I look at artists and my brain explodes, and sculptors are the same way. So, but as I was saying, sorry, digressing a little bit, but AI is crunching a lot of people, and I could have done an AI cover for this. I won't. I personally won't. I think a whole other topic. AI is going to become a tool that we use. There is going to be massive displacements, and eventually it is going to assist people for various things. I personally don't like it, especially on the artist front, because it's sampling artists' work, it's using artists' work, and it's taking pieces of other people who blood, sweat, and tears and to make that, and it's taking money out of their pockets. And so that to me is like, I just value artists, writers, everyone, and they're all vastly underpaid anyway. So now there's an even more threat to that. And I hate that personally. I like the human touch, and I think there's going to be a little bit of a backlash on that eventually. But like you said, it's real. Somebody did this. And another side note about Zelda, I was looking at her art, and it wasn't the exact style that I wanted, and her main style is a little different than the cover. But like I said, we kind of went in a kind of a Bernie Wrightson direction, who was amazing. I'm a big font person on covers. And technically typeface, but colloquially fonts. And you can almost see I don't want to damn self-published books, because there's amazing amount of self-published books, and technically I'm self-published, even though I'm putting it out through my own small press. You can see book covers, and the main thing your eye catches is just poor font choices. And that's something that professionals know. There's people who literally do this for a living, study it, that design fonts. It's amazing. And when I read on Zelda's website that she sometimes wanders through the neighborhood and will pick up a stick that calls out to her or something, and she will use that stick dipped in ink to do hand lettering. And as soon as I heard that, I went, Zelda Devon, you're my cover artist. You're my person.
Yeah.
And so you'll see on the cover, and for various reasons, size and things, I did have to purchase a custom-made font. But the Uncle Ed wording on the cover, that's her and a stick, hand drawing that. And there were a couple different versions. Could you do this letter a little bit more readable? But when I look at that, that just blows me away. That's somebody picked up a stick and dipped it in ink and wrote on that. And I haven't put it out on my social medias yet, but she also gave me a gift of the first, second, and third, her first rough sketch of the idea of the cover, and then a little more detailed in ink, just like a comic book, going from pencil to ink. And then when she watercolored it in, and it's crinkled, it's on, it's because the water is drying, and the paper is crinkling, and I'm going to frame them eventually, and I've got wonderful scans of them. But that's just something you can pick up and hold. Yeah. And that's just so real, especially in the digital age when we're all so disconnected. All this digital stuff brings us closer together, but it also drives us radically apart. So it's wonderful to be able to just hold something like that.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I was gonna say that's incredible, and again, you talked about making fun, poking fun of not calling yourself an artist. Well, and of course you are. You just can't be like Zelda and pick up a stick and create a brand new font out of it, which is a very, very unique form of art. But you yourself have worn many hats in the art circles: author, editor, screenwriter. You're currently a member of the Horror Writers Association, and along with that, you've been a lifelong horror fan. So, yes. What was that introduction to horror, and how did that become? Hey, I want to do that. I want to devote my life to that. How did that really shape you?
Yeah, a pretty common story, and I've told it a million times too. Like all of us, I think so. Millions of us have had the same thing. Growing up in the Midwest, pre-internet, watching late night movies and horror movies, and picking up books, paperbacks at the used bookstore or whatever. Sometimes you could scrape the money together to buy a new book. That was amazing. And kind of my horror growth, Stephen King was very prominent because he became famous at the time I was beginning reading. So it kind of, don't want to make any parallels to the career, but definitely Stephen King was out there. And if anyone has ever put a genre on the map, it's obviously him. You could almost, instead of, don't call it the horror genre, call it the King genre, because he is appropriately titled the king of it. So that I just read a ton and watched a ton of movies late at night. As a kid, watched Sammy Terry, the horror host on Indianapolis TV, and played all the bad movies. And my dad, I always give credit to my dad that he was always talking about these great, wonderful monster movies that he watched in the 50s, and from The Tingler, which was one of the
Yeah.
original gimmick movies where they wired the chairs and it was vibrating, but he remembered it as a kid being, oh, they shocked you. Well, no, they didn't shock you, but Day of the Triffids, which I come to later realize is John Wyndham's terrific book, which I have, which was made into a slightly schlocky movie, which left out giant elements of the book. But as I've said before, tendrils of Day of the Triffids, most people have no idea what I'm talking about, but it's space plants land, and they have shiny mirrors on the plants, and they basically blind everyone in the world. So there's kind of a dual horror going on, that the plants are blinding people, and then when you die, it feeds the plant. But also, the secondary thing is that the people that are surviving are blind, and when they find someone who has sight, they basically capture them and keep them chained up, because that person will lead them to food, water, away from the plants. And I've jokingly said this in other stories and stuff too, but the beginning of that is echoed in 28 Days Later. It's echoed, the elements of it from the military. You know, we found salvation, and you go to the military, and it turns out that may not be the salvation you thought. But also the opening, Walking Dead. I don't know if they're aware of it or not, or it was an homage, or it's just a common theme, but somebody, the hero, had been in the hospital or whatever, if I'm remembering correctly, and had eye surgery, and so eyes were protected when the plants came down. So I love that like things that my dad mentioned in the 50s, and then I'm seeing it decades later. You go to 28 Days Later or whatever, and you're like, oh, wow, that's kind of elements of what my dad was telling me about. So anyway, that's how, just growing up watching movies and going to various colleges, and I always had movie posters on the wall, and I remember just reading the credits and memorizing them and watching them, and getting books from the library, and even before VHS, and once VHS came, just became an absolute video junkie, like so many people did. And again, amazing that whole era came and went and is gone. It's just like such a weird little blip, but it was if you remember it was a thing to go and back to covers. You would go in and look at the covers of a movie, and your eye goes to the font or to the great picture or whatever. And then I always love the knockoff movies, that there's the big budget Comet, and then there's right next to it is Billy Bob's Comet with the exact same art and everything. The low budget guys trying to horn in on the big budget marketing. So it was just all kinds of brilliance going on there, and amazing film. So anyway, watching all that in college, I just always read, watched, dreamed, and started writing horror. I wrote my first little horror story was, I think, I can't even remember, it was 4th or 6th grade or something. I kind of got a parent-teacher conference call about it, because it was a sentient executioner's block that was laughing as it soaked up the blood as people were killed. And I think the English teacher or whoever didn't quite understand that. I think they were a little worried, as it were. So turns out there was absolutely nothing to be worried about. I'm completely normal.
As a fellow principal's office because of something I wrote kid. Yeah. I feel seen. Yeah.
It's a club. We're the founding members of the club. Yeah. So that's also a little bit scary too, when you realize that, I mean, okay, they were right. They were correct to do that, to look at that. Like, why is, they didn't know me at home. They didn't know I'm into horror and stuff. So you get a kid writing something scary. Like, I can't imagine these days with all the truly horrifying school shootings and stuff. And also when you hear that, the real world horror of how warnings are ignored. And it's as much to stop a mass shooting or some event and thing, but it's also the good teachers and the good principals, of which there are millions, are kind of looking out for the kid too. What's going on with that kid's home life? What could be there? And that comes out in all of us, comes out in our writing. And as many people and I have talked about before, we put little bits of our own self in those things. So when a teacher gets that story, the good teacher is like, oh, is he okay? And again, my heart goes out to them. So thank you for that conference. Thanks for caring. Hopefully, but there's also ones that just get missed, and then the really scary crap happens.
Yeah. So you've been writing for years. You've written in many different mediums. You've done screenwriting. You've done short stories. Now you're doing novels. So reading the opening of Whatever Happened to Uncle Ed, it feels very cinematic. It feels very like your screenplay knowledge is clearly present in that first chapter, especially because screenwriting 101, the hook has to happen in the first 10 pages, and I feel like you do that to a T in this book. What was it like crafting that opening, crafting Max as a character, and just like starting with that
Well,
intrigue?
interestingly enough, that you say that is I went character forward with the novel. You're completely correct, and I get it why we have to do it in movies, and there's a million screenplay books out there that I probably should have actually followed the advice, and maybe I'd be, have a billion selling film by now. But it's like explosion by page 2 and this and everything. But when you drill down into those, you have to have a character development because here's the hidden thing about this. A lot of people don't realize they call it the first 10 minutes. When you go to film markets now, lesser these days, the world's a little bit different. People are watching on video, but in the grand days of filmmaking, of selling films internationally, buyers, you'll have the screening at AFM or SIGAs or whatever the market is, the big markets that most people don't realize exist. They just hear about the festivals like Cannes and places like that. But at the markets, the buyers, they've got to watch 500-600 movies to see what they want to buy. And allegedly, I'm told they watch the first 10 minutes. And kind of like a book editor, when you send it into a Random House or send it to an agent, they'll read the first 10 pages. You either got it or you don't. They can tell. They've done it enough to tell if it's the talent, and same thing in the movie, but in the book, either the writer can write, they've read the jacket of what the story's about, but they want to tell if they can write, if it's professionally done. But in the movie, it's like, is this going to grab the audience? Because once somebody's paid their ticket in the movie, it doesn't matter if the movie sucks. Once they've sat down, they've bought the ticket. Same thing, kind of, Blockbuster. You put the movie in or rent it or whatever. If you bought it, you watched it. So too late, sorry, too bad it sucks. So that feeds into the marketing and all of that kind of stuff. But that's kind of why I think screenplays get driven towards that, is to catch your attention really quick. And thank you for the cinematic comment. Actually, it kind of went backwards because I started writing prose years before I wrote my first screenplay, and I 3 or 4 times I've gotten compliments on the screenplays that instead of a really sparse style, my screenplays read like a story. And I always try to write them. Now I've fine-tuned that over the years. I write much leaner than I used to. I've kind of got a style and own rules that I follow when I'm writing it, because there's all kinds of screenwriting rules that you can't have too much dense text on the page. First-time screenwriters, if you're reading this, do not, especially on page 1, do not have large, dense blocks of text. You're going to get rejected right out of the way. It's not a fantasy novel, guys. I call them, I don't know what the official term is, but I call it white space lines. You put in lines of dialogue that are not really needed, but you put them there to break up the page and make it look less dense so that the readers don't get, oh God, I've got to read War and Peace, when they'd much rather be reading a comic book. So little tricks like that over the years, my style has adapted. But when you say that, when I write cinematically, I brought the writing style to the scripts, but then the scripts, you're writing a blueprint and you're trying to build worlds. Most of my scripts build a world, like it's either one of them was 1920s Prohibition era H.P. Lovecraft and Eliot Ness, more or less, against the Cthulhu monsters, which I wrote with my now passed on writing partner Pat Shafrar. We had to build this world. You have to set everything up, and if you're doing science fiction, you're doing fantasy, you have to spend pages describing this gigantic world. And the trick is, and it's the writing lesson, is how to do it economically, sell it, make it look big. And then the mistake most people do when you go down to the novel is like, oh, great, endless pages. I can write as much as I want. And then you just start blathering on and spend, thousands of pages of dense text because you're out of the screenplay format. You don't have to be economical, and you just write way too much. So, but the two have fed on each other. So I try to make the screenplays read like a book, and I try to make the screenplays be cinematic, and then that feeds back into the novel when it came in. So again, thank you for that. I tried to make it extremely visual. That's one thing everyone who's read this has said, that it's so cinematic and it's so visual that I go into, even though I'm going into a basement, appropriately a basement, there's another world underneath this basement, and you can kind of go anywhere in this world. And it's a portal and a trigger to some other great, amazing location. Even though in the book they're grounded locations, the magic of this cavern under the house and under the basement is pulling these situations out of characters' mind, but they're still cinematic. If you're in a cornfield, as it is in the opening action sequence, if you got that far, it's still very cinematic and very broad. And the joke is, it looks like the fields go on forever. It's like you're standing in a cornfield in Kansas, but in reality, there's the wall of a cavern right there. It's almost like a hollow deck. There's a magical end to that, but it still looks immense and huge.
What do you think is the biggest thing you've taken away from writing screenplays? Because you've written screenplays for like Ice Spiders on Sci-Fi
Yeah.
Channel, The Shadowmance, Swamp Shark. You've written all these different genre screenplays. What do you think the biggest thing is that you took from that into a novel? Was it we need to hook everyone into the book in the first 10 minutes, 10 pages, whether that be, what's the biggest thing you kind of took away from your screenwriting process to the novel writing process?
Yeah, the biggest thing I've taken from that is, first off, characters. All of my stories are very character oriented. I mean, I have an idea of what the world is going to be and the story is going to be, and I usually develop that elaborately. But the people who come in and make it are what make it happen. So you fill that in, and you're projecting that, and you're writing the dialogue and descriptions in the screenplay. But you can do that more elaborately in the novel. But the biggest thing, so that's one thing. But the biggest thing is the screenplay format. You have to be so disciplined and tell the story. And it used to be the mark is still 120 pages. I think the mark is down under 100 pages now because attention spans are getting my own included. Attention spans are 3 minutes long these days, thanks to Twitter and YouTube shorts and whatever. But you have to be economical. If you turn in a 200-page screenplay, it's never going to get read unless you're, some James Cameron or somebody who can do that, and for good reason because they're so detailed. But you have to be economically, so that means you have to stay on the story beats. You have to get them in, and the pacing. You have to get the pacing in right. And I do charts, and there are a million screenplay books and things out there that have said it better than me, and there's probably technical terms that I should know, but I don't, which is why I'm not teaching screenwriting, because I don't actually know the lingo of my own profession. But peaks and valleys, like in a song, in a book, in a story, in a movie, if you just have nonstop action, you're worn out. You've killed the audience. Your mind can only absorb so much. So you need to have the action, and then the quiet moment, and then the character interaction, and then another action scene and the escape. So there's a flow to it that you have to do, and that screenplays really teach you to do that. They teach you to make, like I said, at one point I did a chart of it. It's like, big action, then smaller action, then it leads up to the giant action at the end. And you could go back and plot anything from just honestly a drama to the Avengers movies or something, and you can see that structure in there, and some violate it a little bit. In this novel, I actually did a little bit, kind of broke a little bit of a rule, is I didn't open on big action. I spent the first, I think, 50 or so pages developing the characters and the story and putting you in the situation on purpose. I did a kind of a slow burn because to me, you have to love those characters. And I had a version where I could do it quicker, and I intercut it. And there's actually a prologue that I was going to start the book with, and I fought with myself on it that kind of opened it up in traditional horror. It was all about a big, bloody, magical scene and getting the book, the magic book, and all these things, which plays in later. But I didn't want it to be open like that. I wanted it to open on the main character. I wanted you to get to know this guy. And in movie terms, you can rarely do that. So I did break that thing, but a little bit in the novel. But again, what it teaches you is to just tell your story, stay straight. And then when you take the side diversions, you take them in movies and you can develop side characters. I love when movies will give beats and moments to side characters, and they have their own little adventure stories. In TV terms, it's the A, B, and C stories. But in the novel, you can go deeper into that. You can go sideways better, but you still have to come back to that central storyline. And that's the biggest lesson from screenplays is stop dorking around with 50 pages of stupidity and get back to your story, dumbass.
So with your editing work too, I feel like we should bring this up because you got nominated for a Bram Stoker for Hell Comes to Hollywood, which is an anthology set entirely in LA and Hollywood in the movie making industry. I also want to bring up the foreword where you wrote that you have an idea for a mushroom anthology, and I'd love to hear more about that. But what is like editing something? How do you go about that? How do you go about collecting the stories and finding what fits into a collection that you're doing?
Right. Well, there's various ways of doing it. And I think almost all anthologies start with the editor. who's the, if you want to call it in movie terms, you're the director. As you see on my covers of those, I put in like written, edited, and produced, or written, directed, and produced by. I tried to make those The Hell Comes to Hollywood very cinematic in that way, and lights. It opens with lights, camera, action. I really wanted to get into that kind of world. But you have the idea. All editors have an idea. I want to do an anthology on, and you pick the idea. My case was write what you know or edit what you know, and I knew Hollywood. I knew Hollywood horror, and I knew all these Hollywood horror people. So I was like, hell yeah, let's do Hollywood horror stories set in Hollywood, written by Hollywood horror people. And unlike a lot of people, I think a lot of editors do this too, is I went out to people that I knew in that case. I went out to Hollywood people, many of which who had never actually written before, and others had written screenplays but hadn't written prose. But almost everybody you find has written a story or wants to be a writer or something. So there was an immense amount of talent. I did have to help coach a few people a little bit and do some heavier editing because they weren't professional writers, but I didn't try to not be too heavy-handed. I want it to be in their voice. And because most importantly is tell the story. Yes, there's grammatical rules we want to follow, and there's formats that you have to follow. But at the end of the day, I would rather have someone tell their story. If it fails a little bit on a technical front, then who cares? It's the story that people care about, but at the same time being professional. So I went out to people that I know. You collect those, and I didn't have to reject very many because I think there were 20 stories if I'm remembering right. I probably went out to 25 people, and then people pass. I went out to more than that, but some people pass. But you get the stories in, and some just don't fit. Some just aren't right for this. And I also pick in terms of, if you've read it, you notice that I picked like straight horror. There's some gore horror, comedy horror, psychological horror, and I try. And when you put the book yourself together itself, I plotted it out. And like I was saying before, you want to give people a breather. So I'll do a really deep, dark, serious story, and then I'll follow it up with kind of a comedy horror to give a little bit of breathing room to the audience and let them laugh and relieve the tension, and then go back into a more serious one. So just plotting that out and doing those things. And something I learned in that first book, my audiobook reader, Graydon Schlichter, is amazing. And he's working on the Uncle Ed audiobook now. I was really thrilled to see that every book I've done so far will be done by Graydon and his partner. He pointed out, and something I didn't really realize was the first time I had done an audiobook, but he does the same thing with the pacing of the reading of the scenes. So in an action scene, and I do this in my writing, it's something they teach that when you're describing things, you can use long, flowery words, but as you're getting into an action scene, you speed up shorter sentences, punchier sentences, so you're actually affecting the read on the page. He was pointing that out, that he does that, a beat count, or excuse me, word count per minute in the audiobook is, and there's an action scene, he speeds it up. And then he slows it down. And you're not cognizant of that as you're listening, but when you stop and actually pay attention, again, that's pro level. That's what the pros do. And that pulls the audience in on a different level. You're not just, and again, in the writing too, you're not just reading it, suddenly the writing gets faster and punchier and quicker. And so you're being carried along by the writer and or in this case, by the narrator. And I've completely lost my train of thought. Is that answering your question?
Oh, that was great. Yeah, I love that process. And I'm very happy that Uncle Ed is getting an audiobook because I like reading physical books. I also like when I'm just going about my day, I love putting in an audiobook and just listening. And especially if they're done really well. It's so I love a good audiobook. So that makes me very happy.
No, it's coming soon. I'm the same way, and I like when I'm in the car a lot. Live in Los Angeles, so if you've been around here, you know you spend 3/4 of your life in the car. I listen to audiobooks instead of the radio, podcasts, and things. But that's when you have these large blocks of times. But I do kind of a fun thing. I like to also buy the book. I will listen to the audiobook and then I'll read it also. And then same thing with I do as we get older and your eyes start going. I read much more on my Nook than I used to. Like Kindles, I used to sneer at it because I love print books. I love bookshops. I worked in them and I love the smell and the physical nature. I still buy them. I still read them. But sometimes you get the book and you're like, the font's so small, I couldn't have read that when I was 18. What the hell? But I love the experience because it's also an editing trick. If anyone listening wants to be a writer or is a writer, they teach you this, is look at your work in different mediums. If you're writing in Word or whatever program, make a PDF of it and then print it out. So when you see it, literally, it's amazing how your mind will trick yourself. You know that what it's supposed to say and you can miss typos and wordings. When you literally switch over to a PDF, you see it differently. When you switch to the printed one, you see it. And the same thing, I get different things out of the book. When I hear it is one thing, but when I'm reading it, it's another. And I kind of love that experiment. And I have to give a shout out to people I don't know in any way, stretch the imagination, but Joe Abercrombie. If I'm surprised I missed him somehow over the years. He's been around forever. But the First Law books, he's an amazing writer that I'm delighted. But I first encountered him. I didn't have time to read the books, and I read the I listened to the audiobooks first. And I believe it's British actor Stephen Pacey does the audio narration. And someday I'd like to just shake his hand out of the blue and just say thank you, and he won't have any idea why, or he probably know. But if you know those books, if you know the Abercrombie books, there's 50 or 60 different characters. There's main characters, of course, but there's side characters, and they take place as the whole series goes on. It's over decades. And he gives unique voices and unique readings to every single one of them. And as the persistent world goes, like you're hearing, like 6 books later, when you hear a character say something that's now a character from the first book, and it's 30 years later, you know who it is. It's like, wow. And this is one guy. It's not a cast of actors. You look at a movie on IMDb and there's 500 actors. It's one guy doing all this. So but I'm famous for selling more books of other writers than my own. So everybody check out Joe Abercrombie stuff and the audiobooks and Stephen Pacey. Like, they're amazing. But and after you do that, take a look at mine.
Well, absolutely take a look at yours. Like, Eric, we're reaching the end of our show, and we're going to have you plug the book once again after this last question. But it's the question we leave everybody off with. As we've said, you're a lifelong horror fan, and like all of us horror fans, we all love double features. And so the question we're going to leave you off with is, if you're going to program an Eric Miller horror double feature for your friends, for your family, for anyone that you want to invite, what are the 2 movies that you're programming as your personal ultimate horror double feature?
Oh boy, there's so many that I could pick from, but probably the ones that are kind of more, that have influenced me more than anything else. I would say for this particular time, I would let's go with Gremlins and The Thing.
Yeah. Amazing double feature, both
Yeah,
bangers.
I mean, The Thing is obviously pure horror, and a lot of people don't realize. I mean, yeah, the Gremlins is, it's funnier than shit, but that's a horror movie, flat out. And, and the best way possible. Just one of my favorite films of all time, and I didn't realize until I was writing this book and rewatched it how much it actually influenced me as a writer and everything that I do. That mixture of, and other movies too, American Werewolf in London, et cetera, that mix that great horror comedy that are really scary but then really, really funny. It's really my style. I just do multi-genres and mix it in, but I've always got to stick humor in and with that. So Gremlins and The Thing, and The Thing, as terrifying as it is, oh my God, there's so many little funny little moments, even down to the last. I love that. Appropriate to close The Thing is that very last moment. Like, if we got any surprises for each other, let's get it over with now. I mean, that's just hilarious. These two, one of these guys is going to kill the other guy at the very end, and they still make kind of a really sly joke about it. So, wow.
Fantastic. Yeah. That's a great double feature.
Love
that might be one of the best double features we've heard on this show. So, yeah, love
Thanks.
that. All right. So, one more time, let's plug whatever happened to Uncle Ed. Eric, where can people follow you? Where can they buy this book and see what you've been working on?
Yeah, best place is Amazon, where pretty much every book is sold these days. I'm on there. I've got my author page on there with lists all my books and other books that I've had things in, from short stories to essays and things. So that's Eric Miller on Amazon. The book page itself, Whatever Happened to Uncle Ed. You can go to my website for the publishing company, bigtimebooks.com. I'm revamping my website, but ericmillerwrites.com. I don't know if anybody even goes to websites anymore, but also the book's available on Nook and Kobo, and I'll probably do an Audible exclusive for the audiobook eventually. There'll be announcements for that later in the year, hopefully out before Halloween or Christmas, but that'll be on Audible for the novel. And also Goodreads. And a note to everybody who reads or watches movies or something, or even listens to your favorite artists on Spotify, if you've got a chance, YouTube, whatever, make a comment, give a like, especially for writers. It's so critical to books. It gets you, and not only is it good for the ego because you see that somebody liked the book and great comments and insights into the thing you wrote that you didn't realize, as has happened to me, but it gets you into different sales algorithms. And when you get more and more likes, you're not only sharing it with other readers and making the writer feel good, but it clicks those little AI algorithms in there and makes it available. If you like this, you might like that. So take 2 minutes. If you like a book, if you like a song, if you like a paint, whatever you like, please do every artist, writer, musician, whatever, a favor. Just take the 2 minutes. Podcast. If you like the podcast, like the podcast. It just helps so much for the person in the long run.
Absolutely. Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining us on the show, and thanks for sharing this book with us. Everybody, go check out Whatever Happened to Uncle Ed. It's a good fucking time.
Good. You'll be surprised what happened.
You're listening to the Prescribed Films Podcast Network, home to hundreds of hours of free podcast entertainment. The shows on this network all have a common goal: providing you with the best discussions about movies and other forms of entertainment media. The PFPN hopes to fill your earholes with audio joy. Visit our website with links to all the other amazing shows at www.thepfpn.com. Thanks for listening.